Hi, it's Tanya here from the Quilters Market. Thanks for joining us. The Virtual Mystery Quilt, Mystery at the Market, by designer Jean Biddick. Today's video is all about the cutting. Click the link below to print out your copy of the cutting instructions. Before we get started on our cutting, you're going to need to put a new blade in your rotary cutter, since we have lots of cutting to do today. Step 2, grab your favorite ruler. Step 3, grab your fabric. And let's get started. According to our cutting instructions, we have 4 fabrics. You have fabric number 1, which is your bright green. Fabric number 2 is your medium bright green. Fabric number 3 is your hot pink. And fabric number 4 is our background, the light pink. We're going to start with fabric number 1. First, what we're going to do is we're going to cut 4 strips by the width of fabric, 5 5/8. You're going to subcut those strips into 28 squares that are 5/8 by 5/8. Then you're going to cut those squares on the diagonal to yield 56 triangles. You're going to cut a second strip 2 7/8 by the width of fabric, subcut that strip into 14 squares, that is 2 7/8 by 2 7/8. Then we're going to move on and cut fabric number 2, which is our medium green. For fabric number 2, we're going to cut 2 strips that are 5 7/8 by the width of fabric. We're going to subcut those strips into 14 squares that are 5 7/8 by 5 7/8. Cut those squares on the diagonal to yield 24 triangles. Now we're on to fabric number 3. For fabric number 3, we're going to cut 1 strip 6 1/4 by width of fabric. Subcut the strips into 6 squares that are 6 1/4 by 6 1/4. You're going to cut both diagonals to yield 24 triangles. Cut 3 strips 3 5/8 by width of fabric. Subcut into 28 squares that are 3 5/8 by 3 5/8. You'll cut both diagonals to yield 112 triangles. Now on to fabric 4, our background fabric. For the background fabric, we're going to cut 1 strip 6 1/4 by width of fabric. We're going to subcut into 6 squares that are 6 1/4 by 6 1/4. We're going to cut both diagonals to yield 24 triangles. Next, we're going to cut 3 strips 3 5/8 by the width of fabric, and we're going to subcut those into 28 squares that are 3 5/8 by 3 5/8. Again, we're going to cut both diagonals to yield 112 triangles. Then we're going to cut 8 strips that are 2 7/8 by the width of fabric, subcut 56 rectangles 2 7/8 by 5 1/4. Then we're going to cut 4 strips 2 7/8 by the width of fabric, subcut into 56 squares that are 2 7/8 by 2 7/8. Note the remaining fabric that you have left over is used for your borders. Happy cutting!